like that. Okay, thank you so much for coming along to this talk this evening. This is going to be the last time I give this talk. So this is a swan song for it. And the best is to last, right? So I've practiced it a lot. I've given it to everything from 2 or 3 people in a hallway to about a few thousand people in an auditorium. And frankly, I've been getting it right the whole way or getting it slightly wrong and improving it. So hopefully tonight goes okay. The thing to mention about this talk, before I get too deeply into it, is that it's quite personal to me. Mentioned that I'm a technical product owner. I'm an engineer. I'm a developer. I've written a lot of code. Has anyone here used Java at all? Anyone here use Spring in Java at all? You've used my code. Almost guaranteed. If you've interacted with a database, you've used my code. And that's lovely to see. It's getting less and less every year, but it's lovely to see. And actually, I speak a little bit about why, when I was working on those sorts of products, it was the best time of my life. I was doing something that made a difference for a lot of people's lives, and it was fabulous. So yeah, I'm going to talk a lot about personal stuff here. I'll give you a warning in a minute. Some of the content is a little close to the knuckle. I don't mean I'm going to delve into areas of impropriety. I mean, I'm going to go close to the knuckle when it comes to some very personal experiences in my life that were very difficult. The reason I'm going there is to explain why where I am now is so phenomenally great. So I need to give you the low before we get to the high, basically. So let's get going. Who am I? You've had a bit of an introduction to who I am. More importantly than everything you've heard so far, just so you get awareness of my sort of appetite for risk, is that I'm also a motorcyclist. I'm also clearly the shortest person in most crowds. They did put me deliberately in front of Mount Everest so you could see it. And that was me. I went to Mount Everest on a motorcycle some years ago. And I did it mainly because the month before I'd ridden a motorcycle around America, most of it, 6,500 miles. Everywhere I'd stopped, I gave a talk about a technology I was working on. It was fascinating. I went from 3 people in Las Vegas that looked like they'd just seen the free beer to 7,000 people in Silicon Valley in the Marconi Center doing a talk around chaos engineering. It was a fascinating experience. Really, I show this for 2 reasons. One, just to show off Everest, because I like that. And the fact that I clearly have very little hair underneath this hat. To point out, I've been in the industry for a long time, a very long time. And I want to talk a bit about some of that journey with you all today. So this is what I think of as software engineering or software development, one way or another. If you're building products using computers, you're doing software. That's my definition of it. It's a loose one, but it works for me. It means if you're putting information into Excel, software developer. If you're messing around with an IDE, with writing Java or something similar, software developer. If you're like I was back in the day, coding on little V-terms with a green screen, trying to make, well, in those cases, try to make things like the Harrier jump jet stay in the air, software engineering. I was a software developer even back then. And what I like to point out is anyone who's working in project management or product management, this is what you have. It's a roadmap. What you don't see on this is, around all of those corners are lethal traps. And I can verify this because the infinite wisdom of the Tibetan Chinese is when there is a slightly difficult bit of road, they take the tarmac away. And worse than that, they turn what is a hazard into a nasty hazard. They then put rocks around it to say there's a hazard here. They turn it in from a hazard into a lethal situation for anyone on a motorcycle. Made me giggle. Yes, so that was the road to Everest. Right, let's get going. Quick pitch. I've written a bunch of books. This will become more relevant towards the end. Is anyone here thinking of writing a book? And I say thinking of, you can dream, all right? It can be a dream in the back of your head, yeah? At the end of this, I'm going to talk a little bit about a new thing I'm doing. And I would love to speak to you about the ideas you've got for planning, deciding to do your books. Even if you're not writing yet, you're a writer. and I would love to talk to you a bit about it because I'd like to actually get a community of people writing in Eastbourne, writing for tech books. So if you want to pick my brains on it, I've written a lot. Some of them are half decent. A lot of them aren't. We all write books early on in our career, which we wish that disappeared from Amazon shelves by now. I mean, if you can see it from the back, that's got to be one of the world's worst animals to get on a front cover of a book. I mean, for those of you that can't see, imagine an animal you've just surprised whilst pleasuring itself in a darkened room, and that's what I have. Okay, so yeah, they improved over time, and we talked a bit about chaos engineering. I've written a couple of books on that. If you're interested to know why it isn't creating chaos, then come and have a chat with me. And more recent times, I've tried to make financial services interesting, and I've talked about security a little bit as well. So I get around a lot. And there's a reason I get around a lot in software engineering, is because I literally don't have any fear of learning something new. Okay, very quickly, I mentioned about the writing. This is an online thing on LinkedIn. If you're interested, hook up to it. It's a very friendly group of people on LinkedIn that are just there to share how we might write decent documentation, content, books, etc. in software development. So there's some lovely people on it that have written many books. There are lots of lovely people who've written nothing yet. So you'll be in great company. And yeah, hook up into them if you get a moment. Okay. Quick trigger warning. Some of the stuff I'm going to share is very close to the knuckle. If you in any way are triggered, I get it. I understand. If you need to leave, it's okay. Now, I want to point out, it's a little trigger warning. Deliberately, because it shouldn't be over the top or overemphasized, but I just want to make sure if you feel uncomfortable, you can take a moment. All right, I will take no offense. I won't watch you leave in silence. It's okay. Okay, let's go back in time. Back to when cool cars were a thing that we all wanted and thought we could achieve. 15 years ago, I was very early in my particular part of my career where I'd come out of defense and I was now working in industry a bit closer. And I was utterly terrified. I was first day on a new job with a technology I had, let's be clear, faked that I knew anything about in the interview process. Let's not pretend we don't do that. All right. Do you know X? Absolutely. Use it all the time. Well, I'd done that with something called the Spring Framework, which was, if you're not familiar with it, incredibly popular framework in Java land. In fact, it was so interestingly popular that it was considered the de facto standard for anyone building complex, large applications, particularly web applications. And I was day one as a member of the company. There was only 5 of us in the UK. I was one of the 5, and I'd just been given terrible news by my colleagues. The terrible news was this: you're going to train a room of 30 people in Spring. I'd never seen the slides. I'd barely seen the framework. I'd done a bit of coding. I mean, let's be honest, I had prepared for the interview process, but I hadn't really sat there and gone, I know how to do this. What I had done, which was completely to my favor, as it turned out, was I knew why Spring existed. I knew what it was trying to give me as a user. So although I didn't know all the peculiarities of how it worked, that information happened to be on the slides. I just needed to go, oh yeah, we created this thing because, and that gave people a reason to relate to it and learn it. So this taught me a principle about any sort of product that you're building, software or otherwise, in fact. Make it really simple to do the things that people need to do all the time, and make it possible to do the things that maybe aren't always that fortuitous or good idea. Spring is known for this. Spring is an unopinionated framework. There's a different thing if you're using Spring Boot, it's a different part. But Spring itself is an unopinionated framework, and it's baked on this principle that if there's a right way of doing something, if it's a really common, genuine way of doing something, that's the way you do it. Spring gives you that. But it always gives you, here are the ways around it. Here are the ways to customize it for your needs. This was massive. This is part of the reason that Spring went from being a tiny little open source project to being something that beat the creator of Java to its own goal. Okay, Java was back in Sun Microsystems, then it became Oracle. J2EE was a thing, and it was broken, utterly broken. The only reason we know that is because we had to fix it. And that's why Spring came about, and this was one of the principles that accelerated it into everyone's development lives at the time. Okay, another principle that helped me in my explanation of the Spring framework to this room of people that thought I was the expert is the principle of least surprise. It was obvious that if it worked one way in one area, it would work the same way in another area. The patterns were consistent. I can remember one of the creators of the Spring framework, taking me aside and saying, this is the most important principle we have. We do not want you to be surprised when you're coding. That isn't what our goal is. Think about how many times a day you can end up being surprised by how a particular library works, or even worse, how an exception is flavored. If there's one lesson I could give anyone building libraries or any sort of frameworks in software, whatever you're doing, when you create exceptions, when they get thrown over to whoever's going to receive them, make them meaningful. Don't do what Oracle does. Here's an exception, code number 32694. You know what that means, right? No, because you don't have access to their wiki with their information on it. They don't realize that exceptions are a communication mechanism in someone's libraries. Anyway, so when we build these things, whatever you're building, we bake in the principle of least surprise. What is least surprising to people? One of the sort of discussions I've had in product development over this particular principle is sometimes it's nice to surprise people. Sometimes they genuinely love it when they go, it works. And I point out, no, they don't. They go, it works because it works the same way it did elsewhere, and oh my goodness, it really is just natural now. They're usually not going, oh my God, completely out of nowhere something happened, and that's wonderful. That's not really what people are looking for usually from their software products. So yes, principle of least surprise is not anathema to joy. Okay, in fact, it tends to encourage it. Okay, and another one that's huge for everyone developing, and you probably are familiar, you've been doing this for a while. Code is communication with humans. You can write the most optimized, beautiful line of code, and if no one else can read it, you lose. This is one of the reasons I created the Software Inklings, is that we're writing code, we're writing software, we're writing documentation, we're writing books, same principles. You're writing for other people first. And I don't mean the AIs yet. We're writing for other people still, right now. And the best code I've ever written is something I can read without even needing to think about it much. That was something we worked really hard on in Spring. We tried to reduce the amount of cognitive load that happens when someone's reading a piece of code. This is a little tip for everyone who is writing code. You know that there's a lot of cognitive load in place. If someone's reading through it and they have to go, hang on, can I just go back over it and read it again? I don't think I quite understand what this is doing. A good example is if you've got, say, a function or a method in your code that does one thing in the beginning, another thing after that, and then does another thing just to round it all off. That's three things I've got to keep in my short-term memory. And my short-term memory is also interested in when I'm going to eat. So you're struggling. Okay? Give me one thing at a time to worry about in your code. And that's one of the things that Spring tries to do enormously. If you read the Spring code base, you'll see that happening. You'll also see some of the longest class names in history. But again, we want you to read it like it's prose. Not quite poetry, but definitely prose. Okay, and the only constant is change. You construct your code knowing it's going to change. That doesn't mean you over-design it, going, what could happen to it? It means you make it so clean and simple that someone else can comprehend it and change it, because that's going to happen. So many developers I work with never realize they're writing for humans. And I love I don't know if you've heard the story of, write your code like the next person that encounters it is a psychopath and knows where you live. Okay, that's the right attitude to take when writing code, I think. Also, by the way, a great way of thinking of building systems, if you want to build them safely and reliably, when you're writing your code and building your systems, you tend to think about things like what we call defensive coding. So everyone, who here drives a car? Okay. Who here rides a motorcycle? Okay, all right, then you may not know this. Okay, if you drive a car, you're taught back in the day, assuming you took lessons and that you have a license, and you're not just driving for kicks, you're taught to drive defensively, which is go out there and, kind of assume that no one can see you. Drive in a way that anticipates that they might do the odd strange thing because they can't see you. When you're taught to ride a motorcycle, you're not taught that. You're taught that everyone can see you and wants you dead. Code like that. Okay? You stay alive longer as a motorcyclist, and people will thank you more for the code you write if you think that way. Okay. The proof of the pudding, as I learned when I was working on the Spring framework, is in what we call the platform product golden ratio. If you're creating a product where this ratio is going positively and it's kind of like a Jaws effect on a graph, then you're doing the right things and you're probably maximizing some of these principles. The ratio that we work to is how many of us, product engineers, to how many people using it. As simple as that. And we wanted to make sure that as many people as possible were using it. We also wanted to monetize it at some point. That's a whole nother story. Monetizing open source, great fun, but not easy. Okay, but this is what we aim for at first. We started off when we were working early days on Spring, where we'd maybe have 200 people using it out in the open source community, and I'd be, our team, maybe about 20. In fact, early days Spring, we're talking about a team of 3, working for maybe 200 people consuming something. It was all born, by the way, in UBS in London, something UBS are very upset about back in the day, when Spring and the company got bought for several hundred million, and it was kind of incubated in UBS. There was several conversations along the lines of, why aren't we part of their seed round? Never mind, we make mistakes, don't we, banks? So it's a small number of people, that's where you start. What you're looking for is kind of a 1 to 10 ratio. You know you're building something useful. I call this a useful factor. If I built something that 10 other people give a damn about, I'm probably useful. However, I want to see it change. And I want to see it change in Jaws-like fashion. So I've suddenly got millions of people using something only a few of us are still building. These days, with some of the modern tools and modern approaches and the ability to market very easily, you can have a very small team building something that completely changes the industry. It's the most exciting thing we have. And I encourage you to think about it. Open source is one avenue to market. There are many others, but what you're looking for is that same Jaws-like effect. Many, many users. I built a chaos engineering toolkit back in the day, not that long ago. And one of the first things we put into it is, can we measure how many people are using it? Turns out you can. Because the toolkit has to do a version check. What's the latest version? What's the latest version? Oh, you need to upgrade. What's the latest version? We bake that in for 2 reasons. Useful to the users, really useful when we talk to investors. We can say, this is why we can say, make claims like it's absolutely ubiquitous now. How do we know that? Because every country in the world is using it, because we're getting a ping back for a version check. It wasn't secret, it was all in the open source, you could see it. Okay, so those were my first set of lessons. It was the most exhilarating part of my career. I went from being somebody that couldn't speak in front of 30 people about a technology to speaking in front of thousands, where I actually had stalkers. I'd never had stalkers before. It was very strange. And I would point out that in IT, our stalkers are some of the best. They are properly weird. But they're wonderful, but they're weird. And I learned all that through that period of my life. And I miss it. I miss those times. And to some degree, I'm trying to create them again. So let's zoom forward to 2020. And more terror. Again, back to the feeling of absolute abject terror. But this time, it wouldn't be necessarily for what you thought of. 2020 usually chimes in people's minds for a particular type of terror. Societal collapse, perhaps. The loss of friends and family as well. That was everyone's terror. My terror was a different caliber, different type. It's very personal, and it was cancer. I had a cancer diagnosis in 2021, in fact. So it's towards the end of COVID, thankfully. What that meant was, after a lot of procedures and a lot of exploration, I had an opportunity to reconsider a lot. It's a bit cliched, right? And everyone wishes that this wasn't the reason they reconsidered their life. Everyone would like a reset switch that wasn't this. But it turns out this was mine. I went from being somebody that had been burned out in the career, written many books. The sort of flip side of that coin of many books is burnt out individual. I was burnt out, I was disillusioned, and I needed to restart. And then cancer came along and said, maybe you don't need to restart, because maybe you're not here anymore, so don't worry about it. But I chose to interpret it slightly differently. And thankfully, I was very lucky. I raced to the end. I'm still here. Just in case you hadn't noticed. Okay. With cancer, I got introduced to some of the most beautiful architecture of Sussex. This is a carbuncle on what can only be described as the horrific hospital in Brighton. I mean, at least you can see it from some distance, out at sea even. And if you haven't been here, it's turn up a tiny little road and don't take an immediate left because you'll end up where the ambulances want to drop people off. You have to go immediate right into the world's smallest car park. And then you can park. If you're very lucky, you get to park up there. And obviously, clearly by now, you're not lucky because you're going here. You park up. And then if you're the lucky part of the car, you can go off to the Macmillan Centre and chill out. If you're an unlucky part, you go in here, and if you either get a checkup, or in my case, I had 6 weeks in chemoradiotherapy in the Sussex Cancer Centre. Okay. If you're not familiar with the chemo lounge, and why would you be? And if you are, I get it. The chemo lounge is a bit like an airport lounge, except no one is going where they want to go. It is harsh, it is depressing, it is quiet, and it's respectful. Except for somebody I met in there, Jules. Obviously, that's not her actual silhouette. She'd like it to have been, but it's not her actual silhouette. I met Jules on my first day in the chemo lounge because she was the only person giggling. What she was doing was she was tripping people up. Now that can sound awfully nasty, but she was trying to get through the hours that you're in there. She had a cold cap on. I don't know if you're familiar with cold caps. They are a very difficult option. They are something where you're trying to retain your hair. You're given like a 50% extra chance of keeping it. Funnily enough, I wasn't that worried. But many people do, mostly women, really take that on, and it's heroic what they go through. Because they have to cool their scalp down for some time before they get the chemo. And then when the chemo cocktail is going into them, they have to go all the way through the hours of that. And it's headaches, it's horror, it's rubbish. I had a much easier experience than that. Jules was going through that, and to keep her sort of just slightly distracted, she noticed that everybody, when they go to the bathroom in the chemo lounge, has to take everything with them, okay? So, and it's all on wheels. And so what she did is she put a little wire across the floor, so as people go over there, they go, dum, 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 and it's this panic. There's a complete panic. Oh my God, it's going to fall over. No, catch it. And she was doing that over and over again, just to anybody who was wandering past. I mean, at one point, she was even trying to see if she could make someone stumble. And not someone who was ill, but someone who was doing their work in there. Just laying a trap just to see if anything happens. And I thought, this is my people. So I sat down next to Jules. There was a free space in the lounge. And you're not really sitting together. You're kind of in corners of the room. It's quite horrible because you're kind of at corners in the room and you're all staring at one another, but no one's trying to look at any eye contact whatsoever. I was sitting next to Jules, and I got her talking because I was starting to laugh with her when she was getting away with what she was getting away with. And over the course of the next 6 weeks, in Jules, I found a great friend and also a really great sort of muse, an ability to really explore things. Because I was in this lost place. I decided to rebase my career, figure out what the heck I was trying to do. And really, I used Jules to bounce ideas off as well. And she didn't mind that because she needed to take her mind off the cold gap. So this was me, young, impressionable, still hiding the fact he's bald, talking to Jules in the chemo lounge. In week 1, very early on in our conversation, a question came up. Very simple question. What are you here for? When Jules first asked me, I was literally like, well, I've got cancer of this and that and the other. And she's like, no, I don't want the diagnosis. Why are you here? Why are you in a chemo lounge? And why are you getting daily radiotherapy to your face? Why are you doing this? What are you going to do with it afterwards if you get okay? What is this all about? You're going through hell, and I was, and so was she. Why are you here? What's it all for? And it was a great conversation starter, and I thought it'd be an easy one. I thought, a couple of hours in, we'd be done. Turned out not to be the case. So I explained to her, right, I work in product development. That's what I do, but I'm a bit disillusioned with it. And she said, so is it, are you here because you like, to make things? Is that what matters in your world? Is it what I do? Is it what matters to produce something? I'm an owner. I'm a product owner. Maybe it's because I'm the one that owns it. Maybe that's the power trip of this. I sort of manage a team and a group of developers. So is that the other thing that I get the kick out of? No. None of it. None of it mattered to me one jot. And that was quite a harsh thing to realize, that 90% of my time in the day is spent on things I don't care about. Or worse, it feels like I'm just pouring my life. Now, one of the things that you get when you've got a critical illness is a really strong relationship between the minutes in the day. And you start to get really upset if they're wasted by anybody and anything. And it's weird because you get infinitely patient for some things. So I don't care if I'm in a traffic jam. Couldn't care less. I couldn't care less if I have to go on a long roundabout route on the trains to get anywhere near London. Thank you, Southern Rail, but I'm okay with that. I hate it when someone said, here's a spreadsheet. Can you copy the numbers from here to here? And I sit there and go, hell no. Really? That's what life's supposed to, this is what I'm here to do? No. And a lot of my day was spent doing that. And it became obnoxious to me. So in this first week in the chemo lounge, much of my working day became obnoxious to me. And I was still working. Now, I'm not saying that as a heroic thing. I was working from home. I was working for a bank up in London, and I was trying to still function whilst going through chemo radiotherapy. It wasn't easy on me. It was a lot harder on my colleagues because they could see me go downhill. On a daily basis, they could see a difference. Another question that came up, again, if it's not the product, maybe it's the business impact. We'll hear about that, right? It's the value you create. That's what you're here to do on this planet. Isn't that awesome? And I'd worked for some incredible companies that had become incredibly valuable somewhat because of the work I'd done. But when I thought about it, even though I may have financially gained, it didn't mean much now. Still doesn't mean much. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to not have a mortgage. But that's not the reason I get excited about what I'm doing. It's not the reason that I am phenomenally excited about what I do now. So that had to be disregarded. It's a sad thing to admit to investors that what really gets them out of bed doesn't get me out of bed at all. So no, not really that either. So this is where Jules kind of left it, is what really matters to you? Are you a nihilist? Do you really not care about anything? Or is there something else there? I went away. I spent a week getting grilled by the radiotherapy. Oh, by the way, if anyone's having radiotherapy, towards the end of the week, so you're getting it every day. And at the end of the week, they give you a double dose because they are evil. Because they want to get you over the weekend because you're not coming in over the weekend. So you're sitting there all week long going, the weekend's coming and I don't have to go to Brighton and I don't have to get cooked. Fantastic. And then they give you a double dose and you have a terrible weekend. And you're thankful when Monday starts. Week 2. I mentioned that I work on things that change things. I create products that change the world. A product is change. Well, question up from Jules was, then what does it change? Maybe the answer to what matters to you is in what the sort of impact the product has in the world, the change it might introduce. Well, the first principle is to know that anything you build should be change. Otherwise, you're expending your life on something that really doesn't make a difference. And I've always been guided by that. I do not want to work on yet another widget that looks very similar to someone else's widget. I want to work on something that's different. So every product is change, which means that every product needs a story about how it's going to change the people around it. So what I worked out is when I create platforms and products and things like the Spring Framework, I'm taking something that could be quite difficult to approach and I'm changing it from something where you'll die on it because you'll get it wrong, and I try and make it habitable and useful. This is my game. I take things that are very difficult to use or do, and I try to make it possible for everyone to do it without losing limbs. That's what we do in Spring. That's what I did in every tool I built, every platform I built for every company I've been in. So I create an environment, I create a situation where people can do their best work and they can thrive. So now I felt we were starting to get close to something. This felt better. I looked at that sentence and I thought, when I was talking to Jules about this, I was like, yeah, I'm really here about thriving. I like it when I could see other people thrive. And what thrive looks like is not always more productive. It can mean goes home early, has something else to do with their life. I much prefer those models of what thriving looks like. Maybe taking a snooze in the afternoon with your cats. That level could be something that could be considered a success for my software product. And so Jules sort of noticed that I kept going back to the word habitat. So she creates systems, something that people inhabit, to live in. Now think about that. The environment you have at work, it isn't just an environment. Environment makes it sound like external to you. As a habitat, though, it's a place where you live. You live at work as much as you tend to live at home. So making it an environment where people can enjoy and thrive is table stakes for creativity and innovation. And so when I was talking to Jules about this, she could see I was getting more excited. The things don't matter, but the habitat, it kind of really did. I got very excited about that word. I create habitats. You can tell when I'm excited about something. I put a lot of stuff on LinkedIn about it all of a sudden. I'm kind of like a love bomb on LinkedIn all of a sudden. One of the things I noticed is it's a complex socio-technical habitat. Now, this relates to my work in chaos engineering. Chaos engineering exists because the world is complex, and I'm careful with that term. I don't mean complicated, and I don't mean simple. There is complex, which means cause and effect, really tricky to discern, if at all. Socio-technical is because it's people, technology, it's the mix. There's all the relationships between those things, and they exist in a complex environment. The challenge with this sort of habitat is knowing how to improve it is hard. To make something better and to tangibly measure it being better is hard. There's loads of books out there on OKRs and other mechanisms of defining what good looks like. Most of them ignore the fact that we're working with a complex socio-technical environment. At least they ignore it, but some of them make allusions to it, which is good, because they tend to say the limitation of this is you're really just trying to guide a messy system. And I'm okay with that. When they say that, I'm okay. But any OKR system that's invented to say we have absolute control here on where we're going is missing the point. Okay, so Jules is getting bored at this point. Perhaps you are as well, so I'll move along quickly. She said, well, that's all nice, but what makes a good habitat then? What do you build that makes something good? I came back in week 3, and I came back with my favorite picture of the whole presentation. Okay, this was a picture, by the way, that existed because of an original thought with the presentation. It's got almost nothing to do with the message that's left. Because I had a whole arc in here about Plato. And if you're familiar what Plato means, does anyone know what Plato's real name was? Because it wasn't Plato. Does anyone know what Plato means and how he got that nickname? It literally means plate or platter or table. It's a platform. And the idea was because he was a wrestler, he could lift people up and throw them. He was known for it. Big, broad back. So imagine that. You've got a nickname as Broadback, and that becomes your philosophical name for a perpetuity. Anyway, setting aside that, because that's nothing to do with the point. The point here is that a habitat, the reason we call it a platform that I work on is because it's supposed to lift people up. It's supposed to help them thrive. So I look for all the signals that help me know that I'm making a difference to people's lives. So I went in with this to Jules and I said, this is what I do. Again, she noticed a level of excitement building. Okay, you lift people up. Well, how do you do that? Well, that looks good if people are being more creative. If they come up with new ideas. If they're shocking me a little bit. But being creative requires confidence. So I need to create an environment that is super safe for them to be dangerous. I need the dangerous ideas. That means that I need a habitat that's safe to receive them. So what I do is when I create my habitats in software engineering for my teams, I create an environment that maximizes confidence. I try to help teams know they're in the right place, looking at the right thing, doing the right work at the right time. And believe it or not, almost everything I engineer is around that. I have abused the pyramid of needs to explain this. So when I'm building a platform, I start at the bottom. What do they need to know? They need to know they're using the platform. If they don't know they're using it, they could be disappearing off on a mountain and getting lost. So when I build a product, I want them to know where the boundaries are. What's the identity? Where's the scope? How do they know if they're still using it or not, or doing something I didn't expect? I make it reliable and secure by default. Again, table stakes. Give them the freedom to create on top of it. Give them the freedom to choose the level of quality that is best for them. Give them freedom to contribute and the mechanisms to contribute. And then freedom of expression at the top so that they can really show their own caliber. Up here is where you get people who love your product because you're giving them the freedom to look smart. At this point, your product isn't the point. What they can do with it is. Kathy Sierra is an incredible speaker and product person out there. If you haven't seen anything she's done, check her out. She wrote a book called Badass Users. She taught me how to write books. What she did is say that, how do you judge whether your product's a success? Because someone is showing someone else something they've done with it. Not the product, what they've done with it. That matters hugely. So if you're building, she uses the example of a photo app. Forget photos. If someone is showing off a photo that they've prepared using your system, that's the win. Because then people will ask, how did you do that? And then you can start to sell it the right way. Okay, so you're tuning empowerment. Through all that pyramid, you're tuning the right level of empowerment to the team to know that they're confident to be able to be empowered. And I thought when I got asked that question by Jules, maybe it's culturally sensitive. We talked about culture earlier. I was like, oh, maybe context really matters here. Because you go to some companies and the last thing they want to do is empower their people. I'll give you an example. HMP Lewis. In the prison, the last thing you're doing is empowering the users. You're actually taking an awful lot of power away from them. Okay, so it's very culturally sensitive. Different environments, different levels of empowerment. Week 4, I came back. I still felt it was culturally sensitive. And one of the things I realized is where I work, and the best teams I work with, strive for autonomy and responsibility. They're able to do what they feel is the right thing because they know they're in the right place at the right time looking at the right thing. So I build products that support that habitat that helps them be creative autonomously. That's a property I look for. Am I getting that in my system? And I do it for a hugely broad community. So one of the things that gets missed in platform engineering is if you're building a platform, you're not just building it for the users, you're building it for the secondary users, the tertiary users, the stakeholders. There's a whole community of people out there that will be touching on it. You don't forget them. You bring them in as well. You help them know they're looking at the right thing at the right place at the right time. Okay, so how are those needs met? Ooh, complicated. Okay, week 5, almost there, I promise. It's not complicated. I thought it was complicated to build products that people love, and it's not. I got taught this when I wrote my latest book. I won't go into the details of what a CNAP, or Cloud Native Application Protection Platform, is, but I can tell you what it achieves. As a platform product, it understands OODA loops. Anyone heard OODA loops before? Oh, it's a lovely story. Let me give it to you quickly. Okay, back in the day, everyone's seen the film Top Gun? Yeah, right? Awesome. No, there's a few people that haven't seen it. Come on, where have you been? The 80s didn't happen? Okay, Top Gun. One of the most underappreciated movies of all time. In that, it's dogfighting in jets. What's not to love? Okay. There's a general, I think. Yeah, general called John Boyd, who said in a battle, in a dogfight, the best way to win is not to have the fastest plane, not necessarily to have the best technology. It's to be able to make decisions and actions quick. The faster, Sophie, come here, go on. Be able to make decisions and actions quickly, you need to be able to observe and point in the right direction. Okay, like I just did. Observe, orient, decide, act. That's what OODA means. When you're building a product, whatever it is, you're helping people do that. Help them look in the right place, turn in the right direction, make a decision, perform an action. And that's what these sort of products do, these CNAPs. But they do it for a wide collection of different people. So this is a collaborative system that enables OODA loops to happen. It was all about the OODA loops. And this meant in my products, I focus on behavior much more than structure. I look to amplify the OODA loops as much as possible. They are, in fact, the product experience. What behaviors do you want to have in your product? Right, quick one for you. Does anyone know who said this? Oh, anybody? Go on. There's a shot coming. It's Descartes, right? No, of course it's not. Descartes never said that. Well, it's not true. He did say it, but that wasn't all he said. So if you ever look up in his meditations what he actually said, he did say that, but it had a piece at the beginning that everyone forgets because it's not quite as snappy. Dubito, ergo, cogito, ergo sum. Okay. I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am. When you're building products, you're not the expert. I don't care if you think you are. I don't care if you're one pinpoint in the community that should be using it. You're not the expert. One of the things that helps me enormously is realizing I know nothing. Back to Socrates now, we're going even further back. I have to go and learn every product, what is the OODA loops that make sense. It's not just for me. Every piece of product literature out there that says, build it for you first, it's kind of lying. You kind of do, you scratch an itch, but know that that's the tiniest part of the journey. To make it a powerful product, you've got to find out what people want it to be, not you. You're not that person. You're not the only data point. So what I do is I follow the needs. I look what everyone's trying to do across this entire scope, and I start to go, what could better satisfy these different levels? Okay, another big thing that back to Kathy told me. Kathy taught me to write a particular type of book called the Head First series. You may or may not have encountered it. Head First books are lovely. You either hate them or you love them. They're a bit like Marmite. Okay? One of the differences between Head First and Dummies guides. Dummies assume you're dumb and that they need to make you smarter. Head First assume you're smart, and then they're going to make you even smarter than that, or they're going to make you realize how smart you are. And that was something that I inject into my products as well. I don't create products that treat you as dumb, because you'll know. What I do is say, this is tuned to you, and now I'm going to tune it to the next step for you, the next step for you. I'm going to help you grow, and you're going to decide when you're ready. I don't gamify my products much either. Has anyone here been to a sort of family gathering where someone says, let's all play a game together? And you go, forced fun, so wonderful. Okay, that's what gamification feels like a lot of the time. We're going to make a product that's going to make you love the fact you have to do your tax return. No, you're not. Take it away from me, please. Don't make it fun. You can't, you'll fail. Another thing that I noticed is you can't standardize heavily where something is domain specific. If there's parts of your product that have to be extremely unique to a given environment, don't try and standardize them, because you just annoy people. If someone thinks there's a unique way of doing something in their environment, they're probably right. And if you try and say you should do it this other way, immediately you've got a challenge. You've got a dissonance. Which leads to the title of the talk, just about. Don't feed the pigeons. Don't encourage behaviors you don't want. It's a simple principle, but I apply it to every product I work on. There is often the situation where many, many users say, we really want it to do X. And you go, that's not what it's there to do. I'll give you an example. I've created a spreadsheet. I don't want to put a Space Invader game in it. No matter how much you want one, everyone knows there is one, right? Inside Excel. You can find a key combo. Is it Space Invaders or Pac-Man? There's a game in it. There used to be a key combo. If you put it into Excel, it would launch the game up. I just think it's lovely. Whoever did that, I think they're a legend. But I use it as an example of, actually, an even better example. My mum. My mum is also a legend. She uses, with absolute confidence, Excel version 0.54b on my Mac from 1984, I think, 5. Right? She's using a beta release pre 1.0 of Excel. It does everything she needs. What have we done with the last 30, 40 years? Well, I'll tell you what we've done. We've made Excel do more and more and more and more. Until there's a point like today where I'm sitting there crying, trying to make a chart update and realizing the one thing they haven't worked on is the chart mechanics. But they've worked on everything else. I can pretty much put a new frame around anything. But can I make a chart do what I want it? No. Microsoft, by the way, are one of my favorite targets for product engineering problems. Just because they've been around so long, they've made every mistake imaginable. It's beautiful. Okay. Everything I do is experiment driven. I don't know what everyone else needs. I will build my products in a way where I can experiment and find out what they need. There's a wonderful toolkit out there called DX. If you haven't used it, go and take a peek at it. DX, if you're working on anything for developers, DX is a toolkit that's literally developer experience. You can engage with the developers. It gives you a platform for them to give their opinions to you. It's wonderful for that. Otherwise, you end up guessing, and you guess wrong. Okay, then, last question from Jules. How do I measure success? Last week, finally, I'm almost at the end of my chemo radiotherapy journey. The challenge is I'm working in a complex socio-technical environment, so measuring success is not simple. Can't be. This is where DX comes to the fore as a platform, but you don't have to use DX. You can do it in lots of ways, but measurements and questionnaires galore are a great way of measuring success, seeing the trends of people using the products you've got. But one thing you must never forget, because it's a complex socio-technical environment, there's a better way of understanding what better looks like. Because when you use surveys and questionnaires and metrics gathering, it abstracts the human story away. Good example is when you measure things like engagement. Everyone's using my website all the time. My dashboard is so popular. Yes, they're using it because the rest of their life is hell and it's the one source of information they can need, but you haven't made it any better. You've just made it another place they need to check. But you've got great engagement. The problem with just metrics is you lose the human. We lose the stories. Now, stories is a blurry term, but it's actually how we can navigate a complex socio-technical environment to see what better looks like. You do it by looking at the stories you get now and the stories you get afterwards. And are they more of the stories you'd like? Are people telling different stories about their experience? I don't mean user stories, by the way. That's a whole nother thing. I mean, literally, when you sit someone down and say, tell me about your day, and they tell you a story of their day, does it sound better to you both today than it did before you gave them the product, gave them the feature? Because abstraction doesn't lead to compassion. Stories do. And you can go and see these things. Talking to people is the only way. Listening to people, in fact, is the only way to build empathy, compassion, and connection through your products. Okay, quick epilogue. I'll race to the end. I know I got to go. Okay. Back to my two people in the story, myself and Jules. I have an unfortunate moment now for you because the story doesn't end perfectly happily. There are two doors out of the cancer experience. I went through one of them, but it took a toll. 6 weeks of difference. Not long after I got my cancer-free diagnosis, I got a call from Jules saying she was finishing her treatments. She'd had enough. She'd tried a few times now, and the game was done. I spoke to her and her husband when I was planning this talk. When I spoke to her about I might do a talk like this one day, I spoke to her husband recently and said, I'm doing it. They're very supportive of me telling this story. I want to put your mind at rest. I'm not betraying any confidences here. A couple of days before Jules passed away, I spoke to her again. And she asked me the same question. By the way, I asked it of her too. I won't tell you what her answer is, that's private. But she asked me, what are you here for? What did you survive for? Now that I was cancer-free and honestly racked with survivor guilt, why am I still here? I knew. Through all of those conversations, everything I've shared with you tonight, and probably many things I won't have time to share with you, I know why I'm here. I know why I love doing what we do. It's other people. The impact on other people's stories. When I build something and their life changes for the better, that is amazing. That's the measurement of success in software product development. Not how many metrics you've got or how wonderfully available it is or anything else. Does someone else's life improve? Are they able to be more creative, more involved? Are they able to have more life because of what you do? That, I use the picture of Van Gogh just because I was in Amsterdam when I first gave this talk. So this is now the bookend. You see, that was why I had that in there. It's all about other people's stories. There are many ways of measuring product success, but what matters is looking in someone's eyes and knowing that they have benefited. Even better, that they love what you've provided because it makes them look amazing. I've had that many times in my career, even from the stalkers that I mentioned at the beginning. They loved to stalk me, of all people, I'm not hard to find, because I made their life better. I don't know always how, but apparently I did. They were putting an awful lot of effort into stalking me for something, so must have been that. You're saving their lives. Nothing could be more crucial than saving life for people to spend it in better ways. And there's actually a collection of people in the industry that are now realizing this to some degree. There's the wonderful April Wenzel, who's working on compassionate coding, helping developers and engineers understand each other a little better, work a little better, realize that their code is for other people just as much as it is for the machine. So I call my technique, announced by Sophie and her best mate, Lucky. By the way, Lucky is lucky because she has one ear and she survived, so she's amazing. But yeah, and thank you. Was it Jane DeVec who does the photography in Eastbourne? If you got pets, take them to her. She's a genius. I could not have got them to pose like that in a million years. It also looks a little bit wrong, doesn't it? Anyway, gotta call that. Compassionate technical product ownership or stewardship is kind of what I do. I try to compassionately build things that change people's lives. And just to quote Maya Angelou, and I like this quote particularly, because my mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive and help other people thrive. And to do so, and I love this, with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and damn it, some style. For those that are thinking about writing code and writing documentation and books, it's a little message for you. When you're writing those things, your story matters more than anything else. Your mistakes matter too. That's where your style is in your mistakes. Okay, one last thing, and I promise you I'll get out of the way. A latest product I'm working on. One of the reasons I still get out of bed in the morning is Eastbourne Literary Festival. I had to drop it in there. So sorry. I know. It's just like there. This is the festival I'm starting in Eastbourne next year. Okay, and it's going to happen. It's going to be huge. It's going to be amazing. It's one of the reasons I want people to be writing and talking to them about writing in this town. We're having a kickoff event this year, so keep watching out for that. And subscribe to the newsletter or pop onto the URL. Most of my products are software. This one is not, although it's got some software in there. Okay, and with that, I'll just zoom to the end and say thank you so much for your evening. Appreciate it. Perfect question. So just to make sure everyone heard the question, how do you get the feedback? How do you get the stories? What's the best way? Because you can get a lot of feedback that isn't always very helpful. Every story is valid. I hear what you're saying about some are better than others. In every story, there is something worth taking away. So what I tend to do is make a huge amount of my time available to people. I go to where they are, I'll watch how they're working, and I'll gather the stories that I see and that they tell me. I wish I could make it more scalable, but I haven't found a way to do so. One of the reasons it has to be one-on-one or it's best done as one-on-one, is I learned this in one of the bigger companies I work for, where they were doing sort of user feedback sessions. And you just got all of the group dynamics of there's going to be someone who thinks their problems are the only things that matter. There's going to be someone else who's going to be silent but full of what you need. So in the end, I would organize these days, and these were over in Apple's campus. I would organize these days and go, actually, I'm getting all the information when they go for a coffee. I'm always getting the information when they go for dinner, or when I'm having just a conversation with them in the hall. And one of the skills that I found that is absolutely essential to making these things work is the skill we get taught at the Samaritans, which is active listening. With active listening, you're not just hearing what they're saying, you're kind of starting to grip what they're not saying. And that's essential for you to ask good questions, open questions, to go to the next thing they might not have even known they were going to say. So to maximize the value of that quite considerable investment in going where people are and talking to them, I practice active listening to make the most of it. But unfortunately, I haven't found anything better than going to actually see people. And I sometimes have to sample, and I sometimes get it wrong. I'll get too much of the same group. I try to be very diverse and inclusive in the sampling I take. I also try to go into the more difficult places because, again, you're going to go and talk to people that maybe hate what you've got. I try to do them first. I'm going to understand them best first. But it turns out, by listening to people that way, you make friends. You make great rapport and connection with a community that's benefiting from what you have. So it's some of the best invested time, much better invested time than sitting there creating roadmaps and PowerPoint slides of how wonderful my product is. I would much rather go and sit with people whilst they're working, try not to distract them too much, or pick up lessons that they want to share with me. So yeah, I've found no better way than leaving the door open for every conversation. Okay. Familiar with it, my friend. Familiar with it. I am a huge geek, a book geek. I've got a first edition signed Robert Pirsig. As my partner is giggling because she's seen how many books I've got. Oh, makes out they're on the wall. They're on the floor mostly. There is also. I mean, it's the same laugh that people give when they're going, "Oh God, no." It's a great question. I'll just make sure everyone, there's this amazing book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's a lovely book because it's got almost nothing to do with Zen and almost nothing to do with motorcycle maintenance either. But what it does do is talk about quality. It's talk about the recognition of what is quality, how do we recognize it? And the reason it's so profound, I've read it, I last count read it 10 times. The reason you can, it's like one of those layered books. You take something new from it every time. We've got a few books in our industry that come ever so slightly close, but they're not obvious. So there's a book on the way that Unix has been. I think it's like it's not called the Zen of Unix, but it's similar. I can put it out on LinkedIn later on if you're following me. Oh, the Chalk Connect. Yeah. The session. Yeah. Yeah. Oh no, fair play. I'll make sure it's distributed. But it's not as entertaining as Pirsig's work, but it talks about why Unix was built that way, and it's fundamentally some incredible lessons about creating software in there, stuff that we've forgotten and we should go back to. There's a few people in the industry that might write that book. I could have a crack at it, I think, but I think there are better. There are folks like Dan North. Dan is, if you haven't seen Dan speak, he's amazing. He's doing a thing called Cupid at the moment, which is an acronym of what properties that you look for in software systems that can help people have more joy when they're working with your code base. So that's one of those areas where you could say you could write a book along those lines. I'd love to. I don't know how Pirsig found the time. I haven't read Lila yet, which is his second book after the motorcycle maintenance one. That's more on value and values. I haven't read that one yet. I know that when I read it, I'm going to read it a lot, so I need to sort of set out a portion of time to it. Yeah, it is. So yeah, where is you? Emma, how do I? I have an incredible partner who is very much going to shake her head. She's going to hate this. Everyone look at her, really. So I have an amazing person in my life who is, I've never had a safety barrier. Okay, I've never had anybody that's sitting there going, Russ, come back from the dark place. Right? I have someone that's doing that now. And I'm not saying that I need babying or anything, because that's not something that Emma does. But sometimes I need someone going, is that the right thing right now? Prioritizing is something that I've had to learn to do. And I'm still learning. But what I would say is the amount of joy I get back from the things I'm doing now is worth its weight in gold. It's the thing that keeps me from burnout. Burnout, there's a lovely phrase I've heard about this, is burnout happens when you're expending energy on things that don't align with you. Everything I'm doing now aligns with me. The festival, the writing, speaking to you lovely people this evening. I've just got an invite to go and speak in Munich next couple of months from now. That's all aligned. When it wasn't aligned, it all takes energy, and I rapidly go to burnout. I'm going to have to come here, you. Come on, come and say hello. Come on, darling. It's all right. You can let go. She'll only come down. I've got the treats, you see. So no, we're coming away from the table, darling. Come here. Look. Yeah. I mean, one of the, extending on from that is one of the things I had to learn is to stop, because I will carry on. It's an addiction. So what I didn't really confess to, and I should, is that I used to be a workaholic, almost without a doubt. At one point, I wrote two books, did a master's degree, and worked full time at the same time. I'm saying this not because I'm showing off. I'm saying it because that was really dumb. And I didn't enjoy any of it. And so, but for me, the burnout definitely happened because I was no longer doing almost anything that was aligned with what mattered. What mattered is in that. And now everything's gravitated around that. We're doing a festival not because I need a festival and I need the glamour of it. I'm not sure we'll be able to achieve the glamour. So I'm doing a festival because I genuinely think that if we do something like that in Eastbourne, just like you're doing with DigiFest, similar mission. Right? This town is phenomenal, but it's not surfaced. And there's not a lot of connective tissue between it all. There's the same thing in tech. It's phenomenal. It's not surfaced, it's not connected. These people are on a mission. I'm trying to do the same thing for writing, so I've just stolen it. That's all it is. No worries. Thank you for the question. So there's a fabulous book, there always is, right? By Dorothea Brunt, okay? And she writes about how that you're already a writer. The moment you consider yourself someone who wants to write, you're a writer. And if you want to start, she has, and it's an awful thing, I point out, she asks you to do two things, and I would say the same things. Number one, take 15 minutes of your day and set it aside to write in. Even if you don't write, you have to do only that in that time. You can't sleep, you can't snooze, you can't, surf the web. You sit there in front of a blank screen or a bit of paper for 15 minutes every day. Okay. Because the reason she asks you to do that is not because it will turn you into a writer, but it's a proof of your commitment. So you do that, you probably want to write. The other thing she says is if you're struggling to write, get up about an hour before you usually do. And this is where I'm not a morning person, so I super struggle with this. But she says get up early, let's say an hour before, it could be half an hour, and write then. Before you make a coffee, before you get out of bed, write. And the bizarre thing is you just do. It flows. I mean, it may not be any good, but it doesn't have to be. At that point, you're started. You're a writer again. So that worked for me when I had a lot of blocks around the financial services book, as you might imagine. And I found that I would wake up. I was in hotels at the time doing talks. So I'd wake up in the morning an hour early, which was harsh because I was in Europe. So it's 2 hours early. And I would write for an hour and it would just come. It just works. And another thing I can mention that everyone's got their own methods of writing. I know people who write on their phone and it's perfect for them. They just lose all the snobbery of how you write. It doesn't matter. It just matters that you are and keep doing it. Don't stop, sort of thing. For me, I write on paper and then I rewrite. It's not transcribing, I rewrite it into the computer because I make it better then. I can't help myself. What that does is mean that there's two modes of writing. there's writing and editing. The danger with a computer, or for me anyway, the danger with writing onto a computer is I can do both at the same time. And that means I go super slow because I do a sentence and I go, oh, is it right? Could it be better? Whereas when it's on paper, doesn't matter. I've got to keep moving. I can't do much. You're so helpful. Yes.
That's the way.